You're live.
Good afternoon and welcome into the Senate Government Operations Committee meeting of Tuesday, May 27th, the final week of the legislative session, I hope. Today we have time because we have to be on the floor in about 35 minutes to take up only one of the two items that were originally on the agenda. The elections bill, we will take up testimony again tomorrow. And the Deputy Secretary of State has asked for a minor change in language to one of the provisions, and I don't think there'll be an issue, but we'll do that tomorrow. Today, we're going to decide, hopefully, because I'd like to have this ready for the floor at 2, whether we will concur, although we've just got a monkey wrench thrown in here, with S59 and the version that the House changed version, if you will. So I counted up, I believe, 8 instances of amendment, and Tucker Anderson will walk us through that. You all should have received an email this morning, a side-by-side, and it'd be helpful, although Tucker can certainly share on the screen to consult that as we go through.
I'm printing. I made one copy. If you want more than one.
For those of us.
And I'm about.
I think everybody else has it on their iPad. So welcome in, Tucker.
Thank you all. And for the record, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. I will share my screen just to make sure that while I'm starting the walkthrough, the changes, we can all be on the same digital page.
Yep.
So initially, I'll note that the House did not change Section 1 of the bill as you sent it over. You'll see they didn't update the definition of undue hardship as it. Within Section 2 of the bill, there are a handful of changes. So the first to note is that in subdivision A3, they added a new subdivision C. And you may remember that the town of Brattleboro submitted a series of requests related to giving the town or towns with annual representative town meetings an exemption from the hybrid meeting requirement. And as you may recall from the walkthroughs and even from some of the discussion you had as a committee, that subdivision does not apply to municipalities. It applies to the state. But there were lots of requests from the town over time, including in the House. So the House said one of the ways we might be able to resolve this is to just put language in there that says as plainly as possible, this only applies to the state. So that's what that subdivision C says. There were no changes in the House to subdivision A5. Were in subdivision A6. Subdivision A6, as you may recall, relates to the recording requirement for local public bodies. So your municipal public bodies are required to record their meetings unless they are advisory. There are 2 changes in here. The first is that the House updated the shall record requirement to include a clause that says or cause to record. And this language is not legally necessary, but there's a request in the House to make it as clear as possible for municipalities that they may use, for example, a local television station to record their meetings, and that meets the requirement of the law.
So that or cause enables that.
Correct. It was already enabled because the requirement to record was not a duty specifically for the municipal corporation to be operating the cameras. But this helps to clarify that clause so that some of these third parties can go to the town and say, look at this update in the statute, we can assist you with recording your meetings. Okay. The second update is that as passed by the Senate version, had a site inspection and field visit exception for hybrid meeting requirements of state public bodies. When the bill went to the House heard testimony from a few entities saying if you're going to have the field visit exception for the state's hybrid meeting requirement, you should probably also add it to the local recording requirement. So this gives an exemption to the local reporting requirement for site inspections and field visits. And the policy reasoning from the House was that it matches what you all sent over for state public bodies.
I thought we had done it for all sites.
Well, that's why the House
That's what he does.
does good work.
Within subsection C, this is something that was not contained or touched at all in the as passed by Senate version. So this is a new proposal, and it adds a clause to the notice requirements for special meetings that allows municipalities to post notices of special meetings in neighboring municipalities.
Can't they do
You
that now?
may recall that the requirement for municipalities is that the notice be posted at the town clerk's office and in 2 other designated physical locations within the municipality. And the House has updated this to allow them to post in a neighboring municipality. And this was especially targeted at municipalities that don't have highly trafficked locations in their municipality.
Senator Yoski.
Is there a legal definition of neighboring? Does that literally mean abutting?
It would just be the common definition of neighboring, which means, yes, abutting, adjoining. Something to note here that has come up in conversation outside of the committees, and I don't know whether it's a concern, is that this could allow any municipality to post in a neighboring municipality, even those that have lots of highly trafficked areas within their municipal corporation. There's no trigger here saying only for those rural locations without public meeting places. So this is just widely available to any municipality to be able to post.
Senator Yoski.
Does it maintain the requirement that it at the very least be posted at the municipal offices?
Yes. And something to note about the way the designation process works is that there won't be any surprise locations. The public body is required to, a designation is an act of the public body. So these will be locations designated at a meeting that is open to the public, right?
Okay.
Typically by resolution is how they do this. Within subsection D in 1 VSA 312, they have added that neighboring municipality language for the posting of agendas. So same concept. As passed by the Senate, S59 contained a requirement that when there is an anticipated or planned executive session, that the agenda indicate that there is a proposed executive session, and you gave the language that should be used. The House added an additional requirement to the end of that, stating that the agenda shall indicate the nature of the business of the executive session. This is the exact same clause that is used in 1 VSA 313 for going into executive session. The public body, as part of its motion to enter executive session, must indicate the nature of the business of the executive session. So they just took that same language and brought it over here so that whenever there's a planned executive session, the same indication will be included in the agenda.
Okay.
Something new in section 2. In 1 VSA 312K, this is a subsection that was not touched upon by the as passed by Senate version of S59. This subsection contains all of the training requirements that were passed as part of Act 133. And in the House, they have added a new training requirement for the members of a state advisory body, provided that the advisory body is composed entirely of members who are not government officers or employees. This arose from testimony that the House heard that there was an issue over the summer relating to an advisory body that was comprised entirely of non-governmental members that did not have legal assistance from a state agency. And the members had a lot of questions about complying with the open meeting law, but were unable to secure any sort of meaningful input from the state or advice from the state, likely due to issues with attorneys only being able to represent clients and not other random question askers and advice seekers. So this would add a requirement that those members get training from the Secretary of State's office.
Okay. Everybody all right with that?
Sorry, I thought you were on,
We're on page 6, if I'm.
okay, so I'm waiting.
I didn't have page numbers on mine, so I numbered them myself. I hope I did it there. It's the section K under section 2.1.
We're still in section 2, is that
Yeah.
right?
Is it section 2, 1 VSA 312K training?
In the Tucker notes, it starts with amended the list of individuals. You might want to go one more page,
The meeting agenda, public.
right there, in the bottom. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I see K, finally. Thank,
So let me try to understand. So required to receive open meeting law training to include members of the state advisory body, provided that the body does not have any members who are government officers or employees, meaning that they will already have undergone training. And so this is just sort of adding them. And I don't see anywhere where it says the Secretary of State is the entity responsible for training.
The statute does not specifically require the Secretary of State to be
okay.
the entity. However, the Secretary of State's office has recorded a training video that is available
Okay,
to the public and to the state agencies.
great.
The executive session provisions. As you sent this over, you had proposed one new basis for entering executive session, and that was to allow a public body to discuss the interest rates for publicly financed loans. There was a lot of debate and potentially some confusion or misreading about how wide the scope was here. Largely, the confusion was around whether this would allow any public body to discuss the interest rates for loans that they are taking out as a debtor. And there was concern around that. So the House qualified that subdivision A11 and limited the application of that to interest rates for publicly financed loans that are taken out by or that are discussed by a state public body acting as creditor for the loan. So that subdivision 11 would now state confidential business information relating to the interest rates for publicly financed loans, provided that the public body is a state public body and the creditor for the loan. So this clause meets the intent of what was discussed here. You were focused on, from my recollection, state agencies that disperse loans and
Right.
that are meeting to discuss the interest rate that will be attached to the loan that the state is giving.
Right.
So this expressly incorporates that proviso and limits it to state public bodies.
Okay,
They also added in subdivision 10 a clause calling out cybersecurity as a basis for entering executive session.
Mhm.
My testimony in the House was that this is not a substantive shift here because security broadly in subdivision 10 already likely covered cybersecurity, but this gives a little more clarity and cover for a public body that wants to use this authority. Sections 4 and 5 are the largest shifts from S59 as passed by the Senate. Section 4 and 5 work together and relate to an amendment to the disorderly conduct statute. As a brief summary of how this came to be, Representative Jim Harrison had introduced in the House H145, which was a broader open meeting law bill dealing with disruptive conduct in open
In the meeting, okay, that's how it's coming.
during open meetings, and had a structure where the General Assembly expressed its intent, articulated some of the holdings and reasoning from a string of Supreme Court of Vermont decisions, as well as some Ninth Circuit decisions related to this issue. Then, second part, granted public bodies the authority to adopt rules governing public participation, where expressly they were allowed to remove individuals who violated the terms of those rules of public participation. And then finally updated the disorderly conduct statute to make it clear that it applied to meetings of public bodies. That last part is where the House determined there was the most clarity in the law, and where the changes were the least substantive and more technical. So the House and House Judiciary specifically made recommendations on how to update the disorderly conduct statute with language from a decision called State v. Colby, where that Supreme Court decision and its holdings would be incorporated into the disorderly conduct statute without altering the state of the law broadly in this area. So first, Section 4 articulates legislative intent concerning this and states that the amendments in Section 5 are intended to conform the disorderly conduct statute with the State v. Colby decision. Again, the reasons for this, there is hesitancy, particularly at the local level, to cite someone for disorderly conduct the way that the statute currently reads. Some prosecuting entities, some law enforcement officers are not clear on whether a disorderly conduct citation can occur for a substantial impairment of a meeting, specifically a meeting under the open meeting law. So the 13 VSA section 1026 is updated in section 5 to contain the language from State v. Colby. So this is what the law is right now. And I sent State v. Colby to the committee, but if you look at it, in 2008 is when they were considering it, 2009 is when the decision comes out. Supreme Court of Vermont said that Vermont's disorderly conduct statute, specifically the subdivision that relates to disrupting assemblies or meetings, is unconstitutional. But they saved it. And the way that they saved it is State v. Colby undergoes a construction of the statute where the Supreme Court said, as long as it is applied in this manner, it can be constitutional. And they gave the threshold requirement that an individual's conduct substantially impairs the effective conduct of the business of the meeting. And they gave two express examples of what type of conduct they would consider meeting that threshold. The amendment to 1026 first adds a definition for that subdivision 4, which already exists, for disturbing any lawful assembly or meeting of persons. And the definition says that that means conduct that substantially impairs the effective conduct of an assembly or meeting. That is the exact language from State v. Colby. Copied and pasted from the decision.
Senator Buhowski?
What were the examples? Because one of my concerns with the disorderly conduct statutes as a whole is that they're vague and up to interpretation. So I'm a little, so is this.
It is amazing how alike the thoughts are in the General Assembly sometimes, because Representative Rachelson asked the exact same question with the exact same setup in House Judiciary, and I said, you would have made an excellent Supreme Court justice. So I'll say it again. Senator Buhowski, you would have made an excellent Supreme Court justice, because that is exactly where the SCO went in State v. Colby next. And it is exactly where this amendment goes next. It states that That conduct includes instances when an individual's conduct, A, causes an assembly or meeting to terminate prematurely. There's your first example.
Right.
Or consists of numerous and sustained efforts to disrupt an assembly or meeting after being asked to desist. So the two examples you have, premature termination of the meeting due to the individual's conduct. State v. Colby, the quick background is that it was an individual who stood up to protest a speech during the St. Johnsbury Academy commencement. The director of national intelligence was giving the commencement speech. It lasted 8 minutes. The individual who had purchased a ticket to the event and was sitting in the crowd stood up, shouted some things, and asked for everyone to follow him out of the auditorium in protest. No one did.
Oh,
The individual was asked to stop and willingly left peacefully from the auditorium, was cited for disorderly conduct, and won on appeal to the Supreme Court, who said that a 30-second disruption of an 8-minute speech within a 3-hour commencement ceremony is not significant enough. That is not substantial impairment of the effective conduct of that meeting. But they broke out this hypothetical saying that if for some reason they had to shut the event down, perhaps this was not a decision, but perhaps the speakers have to actually leave the stage, or some sort of security intervention is actually required. Or in the second hypothetical, which they pull from another case, the individual is asked to stop or to leave and refuses, and continuously throughout the meeting attempts to disrupt the effective conduct. Right? Then you start to rise to that higher threshold. The last component of the amendment is just to call out that for purposes of the disorderly conduct statute, and this is, I described it in the House as one of the soft issues here. It calls out that meetings include open meetings under the open meeting law, meetings of public bodies, as those terms are defined. That was one of the concerns that was also raised in the testimony that House Government Operations heard, is that some law enforcement officers were uncertain whether an individual could even be cited for disorderly conduct for disrupting a meeting of, for example, a select board. The context of the disruption matters a lot, and law enforcement officers were hesitant to cite someone if it was happening during an open meeting. So again, this doesn't change the state of the law. It is intended to clarify Vermont's existing disorderly conduct statute to provide clarity and assurances for law enforcement officers who are called to intervene during a disruption.
Senator Wade.
in the court case, I don't think this will affect I like that they've added some real detail to this. And I feel kind of supportive of it at this moment. But if someone is coming back to multiple meetings, so you have a select board meeting and this person, maybe they're disruptive at the Tuesday, May 3rd meeting, but then they come back to the next meeting and then they come back to the next meeting and so on and so forth. Was there any decision making on that, or?
Mean about whether they're allowed back,
I guess are when
having been cited, are they welcome back?
both that question, and then if the person shows up and starts to do the whole show again, and you kind of see what's happening, can you stop them or ask them to leave and what's,
There were a few things in there. First, the State v. Colby decision didn't go that far as to give us some sort of instruction
test.
on how to deal with an individual whose serial actions might cross a threshold.
Mhm.
And because of that, House Government Operations declined to incorporate a standard for when someone could be cited for serial actions taken over a course of several meetings. It was something that they heard testimony about, significant testimony about serial disruptors.
But they chose to add nothing.
Sounds like
Correct, because the state of the law around that was uncertain. And they intended to stick to just what State v. Colby articulated because it was a fairly strong and clear standard that, again, was not changing the state of the law, but was instead incorporating into the statute the constitutional requirements given to us by the Supreme Court of law.
So in a particular situation, in a specific meeting, the repeated interruptions or whatever do fall under the Supreme Court decision. But as you say, the serial meetings, even though one might assume that the same thing is going to eventuate, that is silent and was not addressed.
And the disorderly conduct statute is also written that way. It is about conduct that is undertaken during a meeting or assembly to disrupt the effective conduct of that meeting. I did look into it. There are not many examples that I could give you of where an individual's conduct over a prolonged period of time is connected for purposes of criminal enforcement. It's rare.
And since the town of Mendon is in my district, and that's what Representative Harrison is referencing by introducing this, it got to the point where they wouldn't even open the town offices because this person kept coming in and being disruptive. And there was really, in one sense, they weren't meeting at the time, but it was just, there wasn't anything anybody could do.
Yeah.
So that's why it's here. I did think you mentioned that it was the House Judiciary Committee that put this in. So I don't know whether Nader would still want to take a look at this or not. But as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I don't, where does that leave us? Do we go back through each one of these provisions and either say aye or nay and then report on the floor in 15 minutes that we concur? Or do we put it off another day, giving him a chance to take a look at it?
I certainly don't want to speak for the chair of my committee, but as a member of Senate Judiciary, I do want to look at this a little bit more in depth. Even some of the questions being raised at the table are making me have heart palpitations, and particularly in a moment when we're seeing First Amendment rights being eroded in all kinds of places. This gives me pause, and I want to take a bit of a deeper dive into it in the other committee.
Do you?
But I'm fine with everything else.
Yeah, I am too, actually. And some of it is excellent that we, unfortunately, that's just the case sometimes. We didn't dive deeply enough into a particular thing, and they can do that. They spend all day doing it. So, I don't know whether it would be my position to stand up and refer it.
No, I would just do it informally. I would just ask Nader to refer.
I've already asked Nader to take a look at it. I asked him as soon as I got the email this morning and I saw this section.
Okay.
I gave him a copy of the Supreme Court decision and the side by side. And we had a very brief conversation.
Okay.
But I think that, and he at that time said, I'm unsure of whether we want the
All right.
bill formally or if we can look at it informally.
Well, happily, we have an opportunity to have that discussion
Yeah.
in 10 minutes. When we're all.
Well, I think
I mean, you
we
will
would
chat.
first be able to look at it in the morning and then I think we could make
Yeah.
a more informed decision
I
as to
think-
whether or not.
The most thoughtful thing to do is for me to go to the pro tem and the Secretary of the Senate, just say, we're not ready yet to make a concurrence report. We'll pass over it one more time and that give you guys a chance to look at it in the morning. And then if you wind up okay with it, we'll do it tomorrow. And if not,
Sound good.
Because the rest of it's.
yeah, the rest of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so can I,
Sure.
so then the process would be, if, so just I'll explain out kind of the three paths I think we could have. The first is judiciary reviews it and says, hey, cool, great. And then we would concur, that would be most likely that, okay. Then judiciary looks at it and says, hey, we got some tweaks. We could concur with amendments.
Further
still.
proposal.
Okay. And then let's say we take it out altogether or we really change it. We could have a conference committee. Is that kind of where we would go after that point or?
Well, we would, since it's an S bill, it will wind up coming back to us one way or another.
Okay,
So we could concur. We can have judiciary look at it and give us a blessing or a curse. No offense.
Understood.
Or we could say, but because as soon as we change it, it's a further proposal amendment
Okay,
back to the
yeah.
House. It'll just elongate the process. And I for one hope it doesn't get to a conference committee because that
Okay.
would put us here next week.
Yeah, that's kind of my hope as well.
Okay.
Cool, thank
So
you.
hopefully, do you have anything else on your plate now, other committee, Mark?
Yeah, you have a couple things in conference, you're probably gonna.
We do have a couple of things in conference, but I don't know.
Okay,
I mean, technically, we're still holding on to a bill, as are we in this committee, but we did our conversation about it, so I don't know that we
okay,
have.
all right. Well, thank you for your due diligence, Tucker, as always, thank you for your thoughts on this, and I'll go up and make sure we don't have an issue on the floor. And again, it's now 9 minutes before 2, so with all apologies for folks that are perhaps tuned in on YouTube, we're not going to take the elections bill up today. We will take it up, make Sean okay with that. We'll take it up tomorrow. Again, I don't think there's substantive changes in the bill, but we'll deal with that tomorrow. And at the moment, it remains in the deep end of the pool, treading water, to use an analogy,
It's still in the pool,
but it's still in the pool.
and the water may be warm,
Yeah.
which would be really nice right now.
Actually, I am told the water is not warm. I'm getting alerts on my phone every single day from the emergency alert system saying, yes, the temperature is warm, but the water.
Oh, yeah, the water is cold. Yeah, yeah. Because I already talked about the bill. I was like,
Okay.
yeah, don't go swimming. Yeah.
All right.
I was taking a hard pivot.
But 397 looks like it's on its way to a third reading.
Yes, nice work today, everybody. Good team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, with that in mind, we'll see all of you on YouTube tomorrow.
And how do we propose going off YouTube?
We've got Larry, have you